Hi, my name is Aaron LeBeau. Today I'm going to walk you through a React example app written in Expo that uses our new CBL React Native open source SDK library for building React apps using Couchbase Lite. We're also going to take the app and set it up to connect to Couchbase Capella's app services. And when we have app services, we can then sync information from Capella to the mobile app. The beautiful thing is, recently announced, Capella now has a free tier, which means anybody can log into Capella, very quickly set up a free tier account, and go through then and pull down data and play around with mobile apps. So if you want to stick around for this, let's get started. I'm going to start by assuming that you have a free tier account set up. If you don't, please go through and go to cloud.couchbase.com and walk through the free trial account setup. That will take about 15 to 20 minutes. So in this part of the video, we're going to go through and walk through how to add an app service to your free tier and set up with syncing, and so that we can use it with our mobile app. So to start with, I'm logged into Capella right now as my user. I just logged in. This is the main page here. We can see we have our operational clusters and stuff. And you should have one free. You should have a cluster for free in your My First project if you're on a free trial. And when you click on that and you drill into it, you're going to see here's my demo cluster. You can see I should have data already in it. I have a bunch of options here. And one of these things is deploy app services. You can see here there's a link right here. We want to do that. We're going to click deploy app services. It's going to take us to the app services tab, which we could have got to another way, but that's fine. We're going to click on the create app service button here. Okay, so now we have to give it a name. Now you can name this whatever you want. I can call this a demo cluster app service, for example. That seems like it makes sense. And then I'm going to link it to my demo cluster. So now I know that this is my demo. Actually, I can even just take demo app cluster out of there. Just call it demo app service, even better. There we go. You can see here, it's free because we're on free tier right now. So there's nothing else you need to figure out other than type that name in. And quite honestly, you'll never use that particular name. Now this does take a few minutes, and you'll see here that the message says from 5 to 25 minutes, depending on the cloud provider. That's not wrong. It does take a few seconds. And it could be the time of day also, how busy that cloud provider is, because obviously we're spinning up some stuff inside of that cloud provider. And it's more than just a server. You gotta remember, we have DNS we have to spin up and automatically register this new server in DNS so you can talk to it, and all the other things around security and those kind of things. So it does take a few seconds because it's more than just spinning up like a Kubernetes pod, for example. So be patient. Like I said, this will take a few seconds. So I'll be back once this is done. And now we're back. Our app service is up and running here. Didn't take all that long. And we're gonna go ahead and click on the app server to go ahead and get into it. Once we go here, we're gonna find out we have no endpoint. So an endpoint is like a connection into your cluster's data. And you can have multiple endpoints depending on what kind of data you want to basically have available to your mobile clients. And this is going to be security, right? So every endpoint has its own security. Think of like a security boundary of your data. So I'm going to go ahead and click a create endpoint here and make my new endpoint. So my endpoint name, let's start with the bucket because the endpoint name is going to be based on your bucket, right? So you want to have it something descriptive. Well, I'm using travel sample and inventory, and in my mobile app, I have the hotel and the landmarks. These are location-based data. So these are hotel and landmarks. These are locations that you can go look, and maybe you're in London, you're looking for a hotel, or what kind of landmarks. Maybe you're looking for a bar you can go get a drink at, or some food, or some like a fish market or something like that. So I want to call my endpoint something that's descriptive to me, that tells me kind of what's going on with it. So this is location data. So I'm just going to call this location, or actually maybe, travel sample location. Now remember, you can't change this name, whatever you make it. This is not changeable. You cannot change the endpoint name later. So whenever you come with your name, to tell you the truth, I don't like dealing with dashes. Let's just call it locations, okay? This could be our locations, and then if we want to do the airports and stuff, we can make a separate endpoint for that later, maybe. But for right now, we're going to call this locations, travel sample inventory. We're going to link the two different collections we have here, the hotel and landmark. That's going to make those documents available to this endpoint, okay? So by unlinking this means that when I make this endpoint, landmark and hotel's documents are going to be available. However, airline, airport, and route, those documents are not going to be available on this endpoint. So I'm going to click the endpoint. This just only takes a few seconds to go through and initialize. You can see here it's going to tell us it has two linked account. Now, one thing to understand is that you can see here that it says you have to resume it before you can finish it. What does that mean? Well, a lot of times the endpoint's not going to be configured with all the security requirements you have. And so because it doesn't have all the security requirements, it wouldn't make sense to turn it on unsecure, right? Instead, we turn it off and we basically bring it up so that you have the opportunity to go through and configure it to your security requirements, and also configure the type of documents you want to import. Maybe you don't want to import all your documents. Maybe you only want to import some of them. Well, in that case, you can go through and configure it before you turn it on and just make it available. So we're going to click on locations here, and we can then start the configuration process. Now, the configuration process we see here, we have access control and validation. That's the first thing that brings us to us, so that must be important, right? Now, access control and validation for the scope of this particular video is going to be relatively simple. We're going to take the defaults for the most part. Now, how you set the script for this is you're going to click on the collection name that you want to go through and configure. You'll see here it's got a script already built in, but I want to describe what this is doing so you understand this. What we're saying right now is that we're going to create a channel called hotel, and all the documents that are going to be imported in will go into this channel called hotel. So in order for a user to access these documents, they would have to have rights to a channel called hotel. That's something we need to understand. Once we do a sync, all the documents are going to get tagged with that channel, and that means that the document is only going to be accessible via that. Now, maybe your next question is, can you have a document multiple channels? Yes, you can if you like. That is up to you to decide, right? And your business logic is written in JavaScript, okay? But for the sake of this demo, since this is all data that, it's gonna be fine, we're gonna just take the defaults for right now. So I'm gonna go back to link collections, and we're gonna see here that the landmark is the same way. Just want to point it out. It's gonna make a channel called landmark, right? So maybe some users have access to hotels, but not landmarks. In our example app, that would not make sense, right? This is almost global data. But we do want to limit who you have to log into the app. Maybe you're a travel agency, you're building that app, right? So how do we do that then? Well, the next thing we'd have to do is add a new app user, okay? So we can see here that it's telling us, but wait a minute, we can't add a user until we resume the endpoint. Now, before we resume the endpoint, I want to make one setting change, okay? I'm going to go into settings here, and under Delta Sync, I'm going to turn Delta Sync on. What Delta Sync does is states that documents changes. So say, for example, I have a document on the mobile device. It's 1 megabyte in size. That's a very large document, by the way. But if I make a single field change, maybe I change the address to something else. Without Delta Sync, that whole 1 megabyte document is taken from the mobile device and brought up to app services. With Delta Sync on, only the Delta changes are synced, which means now only the document changes are going to be synced from the mobile device up to app services, and that's pretty cool. So now I'm going to go into app users here, and you can see here it's going to say resume app endpoint. We're going to do that. We're going to go ahead and resume the app endpoint. It says it's going to take up to 60 seconds. So let's be patient again and wait while it's resuming the app endpoint. You can see here, that was pretty quick. And now it's saying here you can manually create users here, or you can use the REST API, or basically set up a authentication provider, and you can link it that way. And there's auth providers here. For this demo, we're going to just create a single user to show off our mobile app. So our username, I'm going to go ahead and copy it from this document I have over on our screen. It's going to be called demo@example.com. And the super secret password is going to be this password here. And we are going to configure grants now. So you need to make this little thing here. We're going to say what channels can this user get documents on. So for here, we're going to say for a hotel, we're going to call it the hotel channel. And over here, we're going to call it landmark channel. And we saw that earlier in our sync scripts, right? So you can see here, we're going to assign the channels to this user. We're going to create this user. And the user is now created. And that, believe it or not, is all we need to do, go through and get our app services set up. So we're going to go back to our app services. We can see location. We can see it online. Now you're probably saying, well, Aaron, how do I test it, right? How do I make sure it works? That's a very interesting conversation piece. So a couple of things need to happen for that. So we can go to the connections tab here, and we're going to get into some pretty nitty-gritty details. So one, you need to keep this public URL here, and I'm going to delete this afterwards. So if you try to connect to this, you're not going to be able to connect to it because I'm just going to delete this app services. So please don't do that. But if you do try to do that, you're going to be out of luck because I'll have it deleted by then. All right, now that we have our endpoint set up, we need to go through and test, is the endpoint working? Can I get documents from it? These are things that we'd like to know. Now there's a couple ways you can do this. One of the easiest ways is you can use your browser, or if you have a tool like Postman, you can always use that also, right? Postman is a tool that you can use for testing APIs. I just happen to have it open here. You'll see here at the URL here I have is our URL that we have on the page here. So if we take a look here, it's the same URL /locations. Now I have to modify it a little bit though, because I need to tell it what documents I want to look at. So I have to add in the scope and collection that the documents are stored in. Well, earlier we set up two scopes, we set up one scope and two collections. We set up the hotel and landmark collection. They're inside the inventory scope. So I have here the name of my endpoint dot the name of my scope, which is inventory dot hotel, which is the name of my collection. Finally, we have to give it an API that we're going to call. We're going to call the all documents API, which is _all_docs. And then we can add a query parameter to it. And what we're going to do is just limit it so it shows 100 documents. And if I were to run this, you'll see that my API returns results. Now, this is one way to run it, but if you don't have Postman and you're not really used to Postman, you can just use your web browser to call REST APIs. So technically speaking, I can just go to my web browser, bring a new tab, cut and paste this in. Now it's going to ask for my username and password. That's the username and password that I had created earlier. So I'm just going to copy those from Postman and paste those in here. And we should get the same thing. You can see here, here's all of our data that we got in JSON. So we know now that our endpoint is working. Because our endpoint's working then, now the last thing we need to do is download the mobile code and try out our mobile app here. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to github.com, and under github.com, I'm gonna go to couchbase-expo-cbl-travel. So this is our repo location. I'm just gonna go ahead and grab the code. So I'm gonna grab the link right here. I'm gonna copy that, and I can just go in my command line and I can pull that code down and onto my computer. Here I've got Warp open. That's a terminal of choice I'm going to use, and I'm just going to use the git command to go ahead and clone this repo. I'm going to clone it into a folder in my development folder just called test, so we can test this out. So I'm going to do a git clone, and I'm going to just copy and paste that URL in and let it download. Now that it's downloaded, I can go into that folder. You see here, here's my code. So I'm going to go through and do an npm npm install to start out with, and that should install all of our repository packages. Now that our npm is done, we can do a couple of small things here. We can go into the iOS directory and do a pod install. Now I'll just do a pod install of the dependencies that are required for this app to work. And our Cocoa pods are done. The rest of this it can be done via just the good old pre-build command. So I can do an npm run pre-build, and this should go ahead and go through and do a pre-build of the actual both Android and iOS application. This is a standard thing that you can do at Expo. Our pre-build looks like it worked and we didn't get any errors, and that's usually a thing that I care about, and that means now we can open the code in your IDE of choice. For this video, I'm going to use Visual Studio Code. I have Visual Studio Code open now. I'm going to go ahead and open that new directory that I created. So in developer, I have this test folder. In test folder, I'm going to grab the repo, and we should see here, here's the code itself. We need to make one change before we can actually run this app and try it out. In the services folder, we're going to find a database service. Now, if we go into this file, let me go ahead and just minimize some of this stuff and maybe zoom out just a hair so we can see a little bit more of the code. I'm going to scroll down. Now, you can also use this little tool right here with the little ellipses to get all the different code. We need to go through and change the configuration in the setup replicator. You'll see here, right here is the endpoint. Now I was talking about that earlier. We need to cut and paste in the value from the app services web page. So we're gonna go back here. We can see this is our connection. We're gonna copy that. We're gonna put it inside of our connection. So let's go ahead and do that. And and Visual Studio Code's giving me a little couple warnings, don't care. And then the other thing you have to worry about is username and password. Since we use the same username and password, I believe, let me just double check that, make sure that is the case. Capital P @ SSW. That all looks right. So that is the only two things we should have to change. Everything else should stay the same in this code. And now we can go through and run it. Now, a couple different ways you could do this. I recommend doing it from a terminal, like Warp or your regular terminal program, versus the terminal in Visual Studio Code. Because when you run an Expo app, it's going to start something called Metro. And it's got a pretty big UI to it. And when it's in your Visual Studio Code, it sometimes can get really small and you may want to interact with it better. So let's go ahead and just run npm run expo, I believe. Well, actually, let's just take a look what it is. I don't honestly remember. Let's take a look here. What do we have in our package JSON? This is a good way. So we can see here, it's just npm run start is one, and I'll do an expo start. We also have both npm run iOS, or we can run Android. So let's go ahead and go back to our terminal then and do that. We'll just do an npm run start, and that will go ahead and run Expo. And you can see here, Expo is not open. So we have two choices. We can open this in Android or iOS. So I'm going to say iOS by hitting the I, and then what it's going to do, it's going to find an iOS simulator running on my computer, or it's going to open one, and it's going to launch that app in it. And you can see, so sometimes you do have to restart it, but here the app is now open. Now, the app's got two parts. It has this landmark and hotels part. The landmark part is using just regular search with some indexes, and you can go read the code to see behind this. We want to go ahead and take a look real quick here to try to explain like how this works. So if we take a look at, I'm gonna actually go in under our database service here and just look at all the code. What I want to do is show you the index setup for landmarks. So the indexes are just two standard indexes. So one index here we're going to do is a value index, which is just indexing these different fields: title, name, address, city, state, country, and activity. Because those are the things I'm going to filter my query by. And the second thing we want to look at is our query. So I'm going to go do find the method here that says get landmark by search term. So we're going to search by a name, a location, or activity. The name's going to be, if we take a look here of our query, we'll see here that the name is going to be for name, title, and content. So anytime somebody passes me that, I'm going to use a like statement on those three fields: name, title, and content. Now, for the locations, I'm going to do a like statement on the address, city, state, and country. Then finally, the activity is those little buttons I'll show you in a second. These are basically just going to search by the activity and make sure that the activity is set to one of those. And by doing this, we can filter our data pretty well. We basically join that query together, and then we just create the query and return the results. And so whatever returns back, we bring it back to the UI, and then the UI will draw onto the screen. So let's go ahead and go back to the mobile app now and take a look at that and see it in action. So I'm going to go through and just do a search for eat. Let's start with eat. I'm going to look for anything that has fish in the name. Okay. And I'm just going to do a search. And we should have several different. Now, this application just pulled all that information from app services already, by the way. The replicator starts when the application runs. So none of this is smoke and mirrors. This literally went out to the replicator in app service. It grabbed all the data and pulled it down to this app, and we can now play with it. Now, one thing I want to pull out is that the like statement, if we go back to that query and take a look, one thing we're doing is uppercase versus lowercase, okay? And this is something to understand, is that I'm lowering the actual names here, and you can see here. And I also grabbed the lower of the name passed in from the text field in the mobile app. That's important because that's going to mean that I can search for upper or lowercase fish, and it's not going to matter how the data is in the document. I'm going to get that result no matter what. However, if we take a look here in landmark, I don't have a to lower. So that's going to come into, or excuse me, on the landmark address, city, state, and country. There is no to lower. Now that's important because if I were, say for example here, I have Francisco, San Francisco, right? If I were to type Francisco, this should filter all the results by Frisco, the name here, and we can see here's all these that match Francisco. However, if I were to change this to a lowercase f, this won't work anymore because it's case sensitive. And that is a difference between doing a to lower on your search and not. Now I could just delete the name out here, and I could maybe go, maybe I'm looking for drinks this time. I can just click this, and now I'm getting the drinks that are available. All these are available in the data, and this is just me filtering out the data. So landmarks is all about just using standard indexes to quickly sort through a lot of documents. If I wanted to just see all the drink places regardless, for example, I know for a fact that London is in here, so I can just search for London, and I can just see here's all the places for London. I happen to know the data set pretty well. I work at Couchbase, right? But for you can search and you can take a look and play around with that a little bit. Now, hotels is a little bit different here, okay? Hotels is using full text search. Now, what is the big difference between just doing those like statements and full text search? Well, full text search, like it says, is full text. It's going to search for words. Now, I'm going to give you an example here where over here in landmarks, if, for example, here we had London, I don't have to search for all of London. I can just type in LOND, hit search, and it's going to find London anyways because of that like statement. The like statement is just doing like a wildcard match. However, in full text search, if we look at grand, for example, maybe I want to search for the word grand. If I were to just type in GRAN, I get nothing found. Because the full text search engine, that's not a word really that it's finding. Now, if I just complete the word by typing grand, you'll see that now I'm finding all the records with grand. Now, it looks in a couple different places. And if we were to go look at that index and see how it's built, we'll see how that happened. So we're going to go through and look at the hotel index. We'll see here that it's looking at the address field, the city, the country, the description. So if grand is in the address, the city, country, or description, that's going to be the big one is description. It's going to then find it as far as that full text search index that I created. Okay, so let's take a look, go back here and take a look at that. Then that makes sense. That means that somewhere grand is in this piece of information, or it thought that it was close enough to that in order to show that out, because that's why the full text search works. So these are two different types of search. I wanted to kind of explain this, that you need to understand that because, you know, when you're using Couchbase Lite, there's a couple different ways that you can search. Full text search versus query, just using good old like statements, and they have advantages and disadvantages to them, right? So, but this is our app running. This is pulling live data from Capella, and it was pretty quick and easy to go through and do that with. So I want to appreciate for you for hanging out with me, pulling down the code, trying it out, and if you have any questions, hit us up on Discord. You can find the Discord from our main website. You can go to I like to go to www.couchbase.com/developer. And if you go to couchbase.com/developers, there's a link at the very bottom here for Discord. That will help you get set up. You can go through there, join our Discord community. There's a mobile channel. You can go ask questions to anybody in the community. I hang out there often. You got questions, post them there. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Take care.